It's Gabriel.
It's Bailey.
And this is CYMK.
Welcome to CYMK Podcast. Today we're here with...
I am Dana Younger.
Welcome.
Dana Younger is here as part of
the Peacemakers
exhibit that we will have in Gallery Verde starting July 20th through October 8th. And you're here in collaboration with your wife, Felice House.
That's correct.
Awesome. Alrighty.
Okay, so what kind of sculptures do you do?
I am a sculptor. I work in a lot of different mediums. I work in wood and metal and resin. And I also use a lot of digital fabrication processes. So most of the things that I do pass into and out of the computer at some point.
Your work and your sculptures, they're more of like, how would you describe them?
So my work is representational, in as much as it looks like something, an identifiable thing. And I like to work in a lot of different themes, but the two main themes that are on exhibit here are there's a Western themed show and there is a nature themed show. The Western themed show is more political in nature. It's more incisive and it's a little more commentary, looking at the myths and stereotypes of the Western genre, and also the actual West history of the West, and asking the audience to really take another look at some of the assumptions that we have about that genre. And then the other body of work is more about caring. It's more about taking a loving look at parts and pieces of nature that might otherwise not, be held up. So looking at birds and roots and rocks and things like that, and taking those through my lens, which is a contemporary lens using digital media, and transmuting them into another material.
That's really awesome.
That is really cool. I know we specifically really connected with your Lone Ranger series. We were reading about that on your website earlier. You take these political or these iconic historical figures and you kind of turn them into Lone Rangers, and it's really actually a great commentary on like Western expansion and like the American mythology that you talk about. That do we really know what happened in American history, and is it really what is written down here? So if you could talk a little bit about that series.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your insightful viewing of those pieces. And I try not to be pejorative. I don't want to tell people what to think. I'm hoping to just ask people. And that's one of the reasons why I like the Lone Ranger idea, because it's a mask, right? And the mask can go either way. The mask can be good or evil.
I kind of see it as like that satire, but it's supposed to be good, but like they're bad people.
Vigilante-ish,
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, it's the period of westward expansion and Manifest Destiny was highly problematic from a cost standpoint, right? The cost to our natural and cultural resources of the Americas was tremendous. And also we wouldn't be here, right? If it weren't for that period of expansion. And so we have to hold these things in the balance and, and own our mistakes, I think. And also, be grateful for what we do have. It was a complicated period of time. And the motivations, I don't think we can fully grasp what the motivations were. But there were some highly problematic decisions that were made that, cascaded things along. And that's kind of what I'm commenting on. And the portraits are the classic presidential portraits. They should be recognizable. At least Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren should be recognized. You can always recognize Martin Van Buren because of his big lamb chops. But I wanted to take these iconic, recognizable portraits and just do something interesting with them. I love bas-relief. Bas-relief is a medium that doesn't get a lot of play, I think, these days. It's a complicated medium for sculpture. And if you don't know what bas-relief is,
I don't know what that is.
Bas-relief is sculpture that's flat on the back. So it's basically like your coin, like your quarter, and the portrait of George Washington that's on the quarter is bas-relief. And so it can do many wonderful things. And it's a bit more like drawing. See, sculpture, representational sculpture differs from drawing and painting in that it is not traditionally an illusion, right? What you're trying to do is actually just make the thing exist in three-dimensional space. Yes. Where painting and drawing is more creating an illusion of depth. Well, what bas-relief does is somewhere in between, which is one of the reasons why I love it, because all of the relationships between the planes of a head, for example, are the same. They're just compressed. And so the distance between my nose and my cheekbone in 3/4 in the round has a relationship to the distance between my nose and my other cheekbone. And in bas-relief, you just take those relationships and squish them down. And everything else needs to stay in the same plane. And so when the shadows are cast, it looks fully three-dimensional. And that's really the magic of bas-relief. And that's what I'm trying to achieve with those pieces.
And I think you do it very well.
Oh, thanks.
Might I add?
One of the series that I really liked was the guns with the pink ones. Do you want to talk about those?
Yes. I called those the Peacemakers.
Yes. Okay.
And there's a reason. And the pink ones are not actually on display.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one of the big wooden Peacemaker is in the window in Gallery Verde, and I think holds court in the window fairly well.
Yeah, it's nice in there.
So the Peacemaker was a very important gun in westward expansion. It's what they called the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first, I'll probably get this wrong and some gun enthusiast can correct me, but it was the first really mass-produced, accessible revolver, multiple shooting handgun. And so it made a person on horseback that could fire 6 bullets was a significantly more deadly weapon than a person on horseback with bow and arrow or a rifle that might only shoot a few rounds. Mm-hmm. And so it was a transformative weapon in westward expansion. And so obviously I don't really have to go into the cost associated with a transformative weapon. But I wanted to take some of the power out of that, or at least get people to sort of question the power of it as a symbol of masculinity, but also I believe that Peacemaker is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because the Peacemaker is often a label that is used in association with great power, mm-hmm. right? The Peacemaker is not a peacemaker because it's opening your hand and inviting people to the table. Mm-hmm. It's a peace dictated by great power.
Right.
And so that was the idea with that piece, was to take some of the turgidity out of it.
And so is that where they kind of droop a little bit?
Yeah, they're flaccid. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I found it very amusing.
I also do.
I really like those. Yeah, I like those reasons.
Yeah, we had our own reasons to think of why you designed that series the way you did, but we both got great joy out of seeing just like this powerful, like you said, this incredibly powerful weapon, but it's just useless and droopy and silly mm-hmm. and a little silly. So
a little silly.
It's a little silly, but in a great way.
Yeah, I had my own kind of like interpretation of it, where I was just like, okay, it's a gun, and then guns have been like masculinized, or like this big weapon for men, and then talking about westerns, and then to paint it like this now societal color pink at the end, and then I was like, oh, it's just like, yeah.
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 So I like this very. So, but I saw them. Are they gonna go somewhere else, or was they just not fit with the?
There's some life-sized ones. There's the big one that's made out of wood, and then there's a series of small ones, and there just wasn't room for them, and so they got edited out of this.
Put them in the windshield. Put them somewhere. People need to see.
Yeah, the show's called The Peacemakers, but you do have the big focus point in the window, and then
the large table and the centerpiece. Do you want to talk about what was the name of it again?
That piece is called The Feast.
Do you want to tell us about that piece?
Yeah, well, it's a feast of Western power, right? And there's the bison skulls. We all probably are all familiar with the iconic images after the Great Bison Slaughter, when trains moved through the West, and people just would ride through the West with giant buffalo guns and just kill bison from the train. And then there were those huge stacks of skulls that you can see in photos, historic photos. And I found those photos just so incredibly sad and powerful. And so I wanted to, I just wanted to do something with that. And I thought, well, gosh, what a unfulfilling feast of power that was, to consume all of those bison without getting any sustenance from it. And so I thought, okay, well, what if I put these on a table? And then I started adding some other symbols of power. So there are more guns. There's plaster peacemakers that are not droopy, that are all around the table. And there's a big rope. And the rope obviously carries a lot of symbolism. And so it's a feast of Western power. And you'll notice there's one chair that's very big and has a seat. And that is the chair of access to power. And then the other chairs are small and they have no seat, and you couldn't possibly get in them. They're impossibly narrow. And that is really, for me, about the disingenuine, sort of like, well, this is for you too. Because it's not for everybody, right? The westward expansion was not for everybody. So that's kind of where it is for me. That piece is really about power and who gets access to it and who doesn't get access to it.
I like that.
Beautiful.
Well, I was like, oh, it's actually really beautiful.
Beautiful interpretation.
Yeah, beautiful interpretation.
Yeah, of the artwork. Yeah, and in Felice was saying that like people come into the show, like for example, one of these shows that we have up here, and they have different points of entry for interest. So if you love Western art, you're here for the Western art. Or if you are like us and you went on your website and read about your artist statement and connect with the message really well, we're big fans of the pieces now that we know what they mean and what they symbolize, even if we wouldn't have normally been interested in Western art or anything like that. So the Western genre, has that been an inspiration for you for the majority of your career as an artist, or was that kind of influenced by Felice maybe a little?
Definitely influenced by Felice. She started with this idea back in probably 2012 of taking, scenes from classic Western movies and gender flipping women into the lead roles. And so we decided to start showing work together. And we had a lot of great conversations, and we watched Western movies. And you're absolutely right. And it's really important to us we try to think about these access points, because somebody might go up to the feast and they might have a wholly different interpretation of it, or no interpretation at all. They might just think like, this is beautiful. Look at this beautiful thing. And that's totally valid. And I think for Felice and I, having multiple access points to artworks is really important, whether you're drawing people in with humor or you're drawing them in with texture or translucency or beauty, or size or color or whatever it is. You want to draw your audience in, and once you've drawn them in, then they're more likely to sit and stay and think and maybe have a thought or maybe have a feeling. And really that's the goal, is to inspire and to give people, some thoughts and feelings and have them take them out into the world.
Definitely. Do you ever focus on any sculptures that aren't Western themed? Or
I had seen it on the website that you had in your earlier work. They were just figures and that were like metal. And I thought it was really interesting how some of them were wood, some of them were metal, and like that juxtaposition. Because when I think of wood, and especially in your nature exhibit, was that nature's really like, or no, wood's really organic. And then that's when I associate organic with like humanity and then humans and like the human body. So do you want to talk about that series?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I love the Western genre, but I am not a Western artist. I'm inspired by many things. Yes, the body of work that's in the Coop Gallery is, like I said, it's more about an art of caring and looking at nature as a treasure, even down to its little stones and pebbles. And seeing those things through a contemporary digital lens, and what that can do, this sort of distancing that can allow us to make assessments about how beautiful is this 6-inch wide slice of the earth that I would never think about, except that it holds my foot up, So I get inspired by a lot of different things. And you mentioned the figure, and I love the figure. For me as an artist, the figure holds it's like about the pursuit of mastery. It's very difficult, right?
It's what all the old masters have done for decades and eons.
It's so, yes. And it's so freaking hard to make a good figure. And so it really holds my interest because I feel like it is a lifelong pursuit to get better and better and understand the figure and be able to put it in different poses and work from life, but also work from imagination. And I think that there is a way in which the figure and the gestures and emotional quality of the figure can connect with audiences in ways that other things can't. And so that's a long-term pursuit of mine. And there's only really like a few figurative pieces that I have in this show, the presidents and the double cowboy. But I do that kind of work all the time.
Okay. So the pieces in the Coop aren't inherently inspired by Western culture, but they do lend well to the theme simply because they're nature inspired.
Yeah. And they are Western. Yes, in as much as they are nature of the West.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of desert scenes and desert plants and things.
I think the cactuses are really beautiful. So I saw a purple one. I don't remember if it was in there or in there.
Oh yeah, that's an aputina. What's it called? It's a prickly pear. It's a certain kind of prickly pear that turns purple. And they're really beautiful. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen them around and about.
No?
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you go out further west than we are currently, you will definitely see them.
Well, the way that you present just like the simple imagery of a cactus, it does add that extra bit of emotion to it because, you take a picture of a cactus out in my backyard and it's kind of boring, but you have presented them beautifully and in a way that it just has an emotion to it. It has like something I connect with, and I don't really know what it is yet, but it's just something like I want to know more about this cactus or whatever it is, the sculpture, whatever it is.
Good, I like
the
that.
wasp's nest or the coyote skull. They're
I
all
know the
great.
skulls, and then with the cacti behind them makes me sad.
Yeah,
but then I remember that it's just a sculpture. It's not like the actual skull because I got really sad looking at it for a second. I was like, it's wood. It's fine. It's not actually a dead little rodent animal, but.
That's great. Well, I'm glad I gave you a feeling. I'm sorry it's a sad feeling, but I mean, it is sad though too, because I think for me there's a piece about, not sure. Sometimes I make things and I'm just like, I don't know quite what I did there. I'm going to have to step back and think about it. But there's a piece about, I call them all the pieces in the Trailheads show. I call them all specimens. And there's something about like impending loss for me. And like, gosh, I've collected this. And so I have it. And either it's a loss in as much as I will never be back to that spot on Earth again to see this thing again. But also I think we all feel, maybe not all, but many of us feel like our world is changing really rapidly. And with things changing so rapidly, who knows if this cactus will still be there, or these kinds of animals may not be, who knows? So there's something to me about like collecting them and preserving them through this digital lens, but still in a natural material, so that it has that warmth, to it. Yeah.
And I have to say, I really love the imagery of the skulls or like depiction of death or loss or something like that, because even though, the emotion, the soul is gone from whatever it is that left us, they leave behind something that we can keep, and it completely represents that they're gone. It's not even like, remember they were here. It was this coyote skull that I collected, or this cow skull. Like you see the cow skulls everywhere here in Texas. And I love that imagery. I also use that in my artwork. So I have to say, it doesn't make me sad, but I really like it. Gabriel.
You don't have to call me. No, not like crying sad. Just like, oh, it died. That's how I feel.
But I also really love
taxidermy.
So.
Yeah.
That is sad.
That is actually sad.
Yeah.
So I noticed you.
Sorry. No, go on.
Cut that out, editor. Cut that out. In your artist statements and in this conversation, you've been talking about capturing through a digital lens. So, do you physically go out to the field and take a picture of the coyote skull or the thing you want to capture in a sculpture with a camera, or you take a photo yourself and turn that into your piece of art? Talk me through that process.
It works many different ways, so I think for me, putting things into and getting them out of the computer, there are many, many steps in the process. And what I love about it is that I can put them together in so many different configurations that they're like sentences, right? It's like, oh, here's a thing that I found, and I scanned it, and then I put it in the computer, and I manipulated it in the computer, and then I got it out of the computer through this process, and then I did something else to it, and maybe I put it back in the computer and got it out again in some other process. And so it really is it's like wordplay for me. Maybe I'm sculpting things and putting them into the computer. Maybe I'm finding things in the computer and taking them out of the computer. I don't know. There's just, it's just like a fun game for me to like put things in and take them out, and what happens to them. And every time I put something in the computer and take it back out again, there's residue, whether it's residue from my hand or digital residue or process fabrication residue. There's all this sort of residue that accumulates, and that's part of the story of that piece going into and out of the computer. And I think that for me, that is representative of us now, right? Like humanity now, we are constantly going into and coming out of the computer,
leaving residue
wherever we go and on us. And, and so that's my way of looking from a contemporary lens, is to look through this process of things going into and out of the computer, because that's us now. And I don't think very few of us are not having that experience,
Right. It's such an interesting thing to hear about your process with your, work on the computer, because, typical traditional sculpture probably didn't have a lot of the computer's help or anything like that. But so I am curious, talk me through how you make a sculpture. You could even just pick one as an example, because I'd love to hear about physically how you make these sculptures.
Yeah, sure. There's a wasp's nest over there. And so I found a wasp's nest on the ground, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful, right? And it's, it's a little bit repugnant. It's a wasp's nest and people have feelings about wasps, but I thought like, gosh, this is like this incredible thing that these critters made, and so I took this wasp's nest and I was like, okay, I'm going to get it in the computer. So I have to spray paint it with flat gray spray paint the thing. And then I scanned it with my structured light scanner. So this is a scanner that uses what's called structured light, and it projects light onto an object. And then it's got two cameras, and the cameras read the light that reflects back.
Wow.
And so that process takes a while, and it basically is like, it's like taking pictures, but they're three-dimensional pictures. And then the software stitches all of those three-dimensional pictures together into one thing. And then
it has to be gray.
Well, when I spray paint it, basically the actual wasp's nest is like paper, and so light passes through it. So the scanning doesn't work well on things that light passes through or things that light bounce off of. Your jumpsuit would scan beautifully because it's light colored and matte. Your top would scan okay, but it's a little bit dark, but your name tag would not scan well at all.
Shiny.
Because it's reflective. And so I use, it's primer. I just use some gray automotive primer because that's what I had. If I'd had white, I would have used white, but so I spray it. So you have now you have this three-dimensional object in the computer, and it needs to be made watertight. So I use some software, and basically that kind of fills in all any little holes that are in it and makes it a watertight thing. Once it's watertight, then you can do things with it. Okay, so then
watertight, like it doesn't miss any spots?
Yes, okay. Exactly. So basically, they call it watertight, and that's a step in the digital fabrication process that's essential for getting things back out.
Did you go to school for art and digital, or did you just go to school for art? Or?
No, I went to school for theater.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have a degree in theater. And theater is one of those great things because it uses so many different mediums. You need writers, and you need managers, and you need prop makers, and you need costumers. And so going to theater school means you learn how to sew, and you learn how to make masks, and you learn how to do all these different things. And that's really kind of how I live my life, is using all of those skills. So sorry, that was a tangent. So we were talking about the wasp's nest, and now it's watertight. And so then I take it into some software called ZBrush. And ZBrush is this brilliant software that's like a clay modeler for the computer. Maybe you've heard of it, but it's incredible. You can start with a ball, and you can push, pull, gouge, pinch, squeeze, stretch, whatever you need to do to it. It's incredible. And I can then take a mesh that I've scanned and bring it into ZBrush and do all of those things to it as well. So I brought the wasp's nest into ZBrush. And then I went out to my wood pile, and I looked, and I found a really lovely piece of pecan wood that came from a company in Austin called Harvest Lumber. And this lumber yard harvests urban timber. So all their wood comes from Austin. And so you just get whatever whatever somebody's tree died, or they cut it down, or I don't know, they just have these things. So this piece of pecan came from Austin, which I love. And so I had this lovely piece of pecan. And so what I did is then I scanned that piece of pecan because it had bark, it had some live edge on it, and I wanted to include that in the sculpture. Mm-hmm. So I've scanned my piece of wood, and I've scanned my wasp's nest, and then I bring them both into ZBrush, and I start manipulating not the block of wood because I need that to be what it is, but I start manipulating the wasp's nest to fit how I want inside of the block of wood, and I can position it and move it and get it in there so that the live edge of the bark is preserved. And so then I take that wasp's nest that I've positioned the way I want inside my block of wood, and I move it over to another piece of software called Aspire. And Aspire is what we call Is this too? Am I going?
No, I'm so invested.
I know. I was like, I'm listening.
Okay. Aspire is what we call toolpathing software. So toolpathing software is what drives the computer numeric controlled router. So this is all going to get output on what we call a CNC machine. This is a spinning bit that moves in X, Y, and Z. And it's a dumb robot. It doesn't
like a
think
blade
for
on
itself.
it,
Yeah, it's a router bit. So
okay.
it's like a shaft with blades on the end of it. I have different
picture here.
bits. Yeah, I have different
sure.
bits that I can use. But it's like my finger. If my finger was very sharp and spinning at 10,000 RPMs. Okay. It's not, so you don't have to be scared.
Good to know.
So this software is a tool that allows you to visually create a code that will drive the machine. So basically this software transmutes from your scanned visualization to lines of code that are X, Y, and Z, like hundreds of thousands of lines. All it is X, Y, and Z. It's called G code. And that is what the machine then uses to know where to go. Without that software, the machine just sits there. So I use Aspire then to create this G code, which I send then over to my CNC machine. And I put my block of wood down, and I've got the tool path is created so that it will mill that wasp's nest exactly where I want it inside of this piece of wood. So then I use a series of different bits. I have to do what's called a roughing pass. So a roughing pass is a flat end mill that's a 1/2 inch in diameter, and it's got very sharp blades on it. And it goes through and cuts away everything you don't want. This is a reductive process where you start with a block and move away everything you don't want. And so the roughing pass makes it look kind of like topography. It's like stepped. And if you look in there, there's a couple of pieces that have some evidence of that stepping on them still. And then once that's done, then I go through with a 1 millimeter ball end tapered mill. So this is a sharp tapered mill, looks like a very long skinny pencil, and the tip of it is 1 millimeter in diameter. And then that goes through and does all of the detail milling. And then I hand sand and finish, and that's the piece.
Wow.
Does it do like X, Y, and Z all at once, or do you do X first and then you do Y and then you do Z?
No, the way it works is the machine has got what's called a gantry. So imagine this table here. Imagine there's a bridge on this table that goes up and over and down on the other side. And then there's a head that has the motor that spins, the router, and that head moves back and forth on this gantry. And then the whole gantry moves up and down the table. And then the head also moves up and down. So up and down is Z, the long distance on the table is Y, and the head moving back and forth on the gantry is X. And these lines of code are positions in space. And so it's like uses what's called micro steppers. So each one of these positions in space is very, very close to the next position in space. So you might see the machine go like that, right? It might start over here and it might go and move in this big diagonal move and go over that way. But that is, 1,000 lines of code. Mm-hmm. There's 1,000 points that make that curve. Mm-hmm. And each one is a position in space, X, Y, and Z at the same time. Does that make sense?
What an absolutely incredible process. Did you, how did you start doing this? Or did you start sculpting with a chisel and a hammer and then you just slowly migrated to using the technology that you had, or?
I've always been interested in technology, and I've always been interested in making things. My parents and I moved when I was 15 years old. We moved to northern Idaho, where we lived with no electricity and no running water, and built a log cabin by hand. We cut the trees down in the forest and peeled them and notched them and lifted them up and built walls. And we had a red hand pump, where we got our water we lived out there for 2 years. And so I have one foot really firmly in this sort of world of tradition, which, is related to the manual doing of things. And I love the manual doing of things. And we also live in this contemporary world where technology is moving at this like rocket pace. And it's exciting and fun. And so I like to embrace both the manual, traditional world and the technological world. To answer your question about when I got started in technology, I had a company in Austin for a long time called the Blue Genie Art Industries.
Oh, right.
This was a fabrication company. We made murals and sculptures. If you go to Austin and you go to the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum, there are 6 bas-relief panels on the front of that. Now you know what bas-relief is.
Yeah.
That are on the front of that building. Each one of those is 11 feet tall and 17 feet wide and in cast concrete. My team fabricated those.
I'm going there next month. I can check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah, they're cool. They're real iconic Texas scenes that are on the front of there's the big star. We didn't make the big star, but on the building, the big bas reliefs that are up there, we made those. And those were designed by a sculptor, good friend of mine, Mike O'Brien. And he asked us to help fabricate them. And so we were doing things manually for a long time. And then I got interested. I learned about 3D scanning and CNC machining. And I started learning more and we did a job and got a pile of money and, sort of said, well, here we are at a crossroads. What are we going to do with this pile of money? And we decided to make the investment. We went up to Canada, and where the machine that we bought at the time was being made. It was very expensive, incredibly expensive. This was probably 2004. So it was early days. My perception was that it was early days of 3D scanning and CNC machining being accessible to artists. They were obviously aerospace and a lot of industries were already using this technology and it was old hat for them. But for artists, this was pretty new. And so I wanted to get on the forefront of that. And so that's how I got started in it, is we took our giant pile of money and gave it to these Canadians, and they gave us a CNC machine and a 3D scanner. And in 2004, that 3D scanner, the way that thing worked is that gantry that I described, it had a gantry also. And on it, instead of a cutting head, on it was this box and a laser, a single point of laser went out of this box. And it also had 2 cameras that
all I remember is lasers when I think of like the wooden. That's
like cutting with a laser, like cutting into wood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
But the gantry is different.
The gantry is just a mechanical system that moves the thing around. So this laser, instead of cutting, it was about reading depth.
Oh,
it was a scanner. But then to scan, I scanned Kinky Friedman's hat once for the Kinky Friedman for Governor campaign. Mm-hmm. And it took 12 hours for me to scan his cowboy hat.
Because it's just a pixel.
Point of laser. Yeah. Yeah. And now, I can scan something the size of a cowboy hat in, a couple minutes.
Well, I was going to ask, when you first got that technology and you spent that pile of money and you got your first machine, how big could you go? Because you were making these big sculptures, and obviously you were saying this is taking some time. So how big could you go with it?
There's no limit, really.
Really?
No, there's no limit. I mean, because you just slice things up into pieces that fit on the machine, and then you put them back together. So you're limited by the size of your building, or how tall the roof is. But you can make gigantic things. You just make them,
puzzle pieces, piece them together. That's a really cool, yeah. Gosh, I'm so interested in this process now because
I need to go YouTube videos of it happening.
I've seen I know, I can see it in my head because I've seen those videos of it cutting out and then it goes back and does more detail. Yeah, we got to pull up one of those videos for this episode. Gosh, cool. I was just going to ask, do you dabble in other mediums other than with the machine?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've made a bazillion rubber molds. I work in wood a lot. I work in clay. I work in all kinds of mediums. My current foray is into bronze casting.
Oh, fun.
And I think it's just time. I've been in sculpture for a long time, and I've worked in all these different mediums, and I'm like, okay, it's time for me to learn how to make things in bronze. So I'm working on that currently.
Cool. Is that the next series?
Yeah,
Ooh.
What are the images what are the sculptures gonna be of? If you don't
Well, it's, I'll probably start with some figurative sculptures. I have some new figures that I really like and I'm excited about, and I'm hoping to cast those in bronze. But the thing about bronze is it doesn't really matter, right? It's just another tool in the toolbox.
I have a feeling some really cool Lone Rangers could come out of some bronze. Just a thought. Think about it.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add or to end it off?
Oh gosh, not that I can think of. Yeah. This was fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Felice and I are really excited to be here.
The Peacemakers will be in Gallery Verde on display from July 20th through October 8th. And then the Trailheads. Mm-hmm. The Trailheads will be in the Coop Gallery. Same dates?
Yep.
Same dates.
July 20th.
Definitely come and check these out. Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Awesome.